Hello everyone, Isabel Stewart, We Have Trauma Education Team. Today is the second short video in the Resilience series, and I'm going to be looking at the whole concept of resilience in a bit more detail. But I've also a lot of questions around that whole concept. So I'm just going to bring up some of the slides that I'm going to use. And as you may remember from last week, Professor Anne Maston refers to resilience as ordinary magic. And that always makes me smile because I think it is a very apt description. We also talked about how resilience can be compared to like a lifelong, ongoing balancing act to try to deal with particularly life's threats and challenges, while also remembering that we need other systems to try to deal with those threats and challenges, and those other systems can depend on the nature of the threats and the challenges. The first question that I have today is around one of the main criticisms that is levelled at the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, in that it tends to locate solely the pathology in the individual without taking into consideration the person's history and the context of the trauma. So I am wondering, do we tend to do the same around the whole concept of resilience? Do we judge people for not being resilient enough, for not getting over something that happened 20 or 30 years ago? And I just want people to think about that. So, resilience capacity, it's like our ability to withstand threats and challenges and to deal with it and to thrive and bounce back from threats and challenges. And researchers know that there's many components to this, but two of the main components may be the person's innate ability as well as external resources and systems. But I'm also wondering, how does the individual get those abilities? How do they develop their capacity? What fosters and nourishes that capacity? Is it genetics? Is it biology? Is it nurturing? Is it experience? Or is it a mixture of all those things? But we also need to understand and take into consideration externally all the systems at play on an individual level, at a family level, at a community level, and at a country level. For instance, say that someone had a really bad accident and were injured. What do you imagine would happen if the health service, the health system, did not step up to help or aid that person? How do you think, even though they had the best of innate abilities, how do you think realistically they would negotiate and manage that challenge? And again, another example might be currently, if there weren't systems in place to provide food to those who are most vulnerable and isolated, how do you think they would negotiate those challenges? How resilient could they be in that context? How far would their own innate abilities take them? So resilience also reflects the resources and processes that can be used to manage the threats and the system disturbances in order. The point is, the goal is to restore equilibrium how we counter again, balance out those challenges, and maybe in many cases transform and change systems because they're no longer appropriate. They might need to be improved. And certainly our current crisis, I think, will transform the health system in many ways. It might be more resourced, and it could be argued as well that it will also transform humankind, maybe in some cases. So again, around questions on resilience and using the analogy of our current crisis and what is happening with COVID-19. And when we're looking at the whole concept of resilience and threat. So what are the challenges? What are the threats? And they are currently lots of those. Threat to life, threat to health, threat to the economy, threat to employment. So we need to know what those challenges are in order to try to counteract them. And that brings me on to the next question. So what fosters adaptation or success? So what are the protections? What might help? And in this case, in the current situation, it might be things as simple as a mask, the development of vaccines, the development of new treatments. So there are lots of people currently working on those protections in order to make us as a society and a world more resilient and to protect us. And then the third question is, and we have to do this on an ongoing basis and to evaluate, well, you know, in that process, how is the person doing? And also at different levels, how is the family doing? And how is the community doing? Are those protections working? Are they outweighing or mitigating or ameliorating the risks? So those are all very defining questions in the concept of resilience. And I tend to liken resilience to immunity, like an immunity, the capacity even that the immune system has to respond to viruses and respond to bacteria and infections. So like immunity, and this is very true, it is also created by being exposed to threat. So that's how we develop our immunity, by being exposed to threat. I think one of the problems with the current virus is that we've never been exposed to this particular type of virus. So how do we develop this immunity while also being able to manage and deal with the threat? But that also means that we don't get sick, because we may get sick and recover. So I think it's a good analogy to compare it to immunity. So I'm just going to show you a particular diagram here. So patterns of adaptive function, they vary over time and in relation to the adversity and the challenges. So this is very important. So there might be times in our life we're very resilient, we deal with lots of things. In fact, people have had to be very resilient, including myself, in learning to negotiate IT, to use Zoom, to use Skype, to develop communication methods in other ways, and that can be very more challenging for some people than others. So as you see, we could be functioning very well in life, and then there might be a particular threat or challenge, and that we take a dip, which, you know, can affect our functioning. Or say if we get really sick or ill, that will affect our ability to function and to work and do our daily tasks of living. So over a lifespan, we can have many of those dips, and sometimes we will go back to where we were previously, and sometimes there will be a lot of learning in those, and there will be a lot of growth. And so we have stretched our abilities in some way. So nobody's life is a straight line, I'm trying to say. And I'm just going to go back to our slides to finish. And so from a systems perspective, resilience is dynamic. It's always changing. It's not static. It's like life. It depends on what is happening, what is coming at us, what we have to deal with. And the capacity for adaptation to rise to the challenge is distributed across many systems. So that's back to that those systems are interdependent and interrelated, and us as individuals depend on many other systems. And if you take into consideration that individuals, families, societal resilience also depends on the resilience of other systems. So it's a bit like a domino effect. And the patterns of adaptive function vary over time, as we've discussed, and in relation to the adversities and those challenges. So we talked about, some of the risks and the threats and the challenges. And I want you again to think about your own protective factors, systems or abilities or resources that might have helped you to deal with challenges at different points in your life, and sort of what works for you, what is a protection, what helps you adapt, what helps you get through a crisis or a challenge. And researchers know that some of these protective factors, and again, this can apply not just at an individual level, but at a family level, at a community level, and at a society level. So it's things like being nurturing, being sensitive, and being caring. And certainly at the moment, I am seeing much more of this healthy attachments in our relationships, a sense of security and a sense of belonging. Skilled parenting, maybe the ability, to be quite a savvy parent, and we may have got that ability from the modeling of our own parents, and also the ability to have discipline and to instill discipline and use it as appropriate and when it's required. Also abilities like problem solving and planning. And certainly the abilities to regulate our affect, to calm and soothe ourselves, and that sense that we might have of self-efficacy, self-agency, a positive sense of identity, who we are, what our beliefs are, what our nationality is, that we're part of something. Also meaning, having meaning, making meaning of things, having a purpose, having hope, having faith perhaps, and also a sense of optimism, that sense of glass half full rather than glass half empty. So it's about attitude as well. And also, and we know even today, having routines and rituals that are hugely important. So there are just some of the protective factors, and I want you to think about your own. So next week we are going to talk about what matters in terms of resilience, and maybe look at community resilience a little bit more. So thank you very much, and hopefully see you